What sleeps beneath the black skin of the ocean, older than memory, hungrier than time itself? The surface shivers with lies. Maps whisper of continents and currents, but they dare not chart the living abyss. Below the frail bones of ships and the withered prayers of drowned men, something ancient coils in the crushing dark, something that does not forgive trespass. They thought they could name it. Leviathan. Kraken. Jormungandr. Names are chains for the fearful, but the monsters of the abyss wear no chains. They pulse, they writhe, they wait. The first fisherman who saw them vanished. The second drew crude shapes on the walls of caves, grotesque, sprawling beasts that did not die when stabbed or burned. The third group never returned at all. Whole coastlines were abandoned, surrendered to things that no priest could bless away. You think the ocean is empty? You think technology has tamed it? The Mariana Trench gapes like a torn mouth. The Atlantic ridge pulses like the spine of something sleeping in the underworld. And in the black hollows where no light has ever lived, colossal shadows move with the silence of assassins. Whispers tell of ships split apart by tentacles the width of sequoias. Of island-sized masses that rise from the water, breathing, thinking. Of ancient battles not between men, but between beasts so vast, so violent, that even gods turned their eyes away. Still, you believe these are myths. Fairy tales. Comforts to explain a missing vessel or a shriek heard across the still waters at twilight. Fine. Tell yourself that, if it helps you sleep. But know this, myths are never born from nothing. They are the scar tissue of truth, stretched across wounds too massive to comprehend. There are reports buried in naval archives, locked behind steel doors, sealed with ink-black warnings. Strange sonar blips. Titanic shapes moving against the current. Distress calls that end in static and screams. Patterns in the migration of whales that no scientist can explain. Whole flocks of seabirds abandoning coasts they had claimed for centuries. And sometimes, a single survivor washing ashore, hollow-eyed, speaking words no one should ever hear. You think humanity reigns supreme? The sea laughs at your arrogance. What you are about to read is forbidden history. A bestiary of nightmares. A chronicle of the ancient lords of the ocean who ruled long before human bones turned to dust, and who still, even now, bide their time beneath the waves. The surface is a lie. The shore is a line drawn in blood. And the monsters, far awake. Turn the page. If you dare. The water boiled with a sound that could shatter stone. No ship sailed these cursed seas, no gulls cried above them. Only the endless, churning hunger of the waves stretched into the blood-colored sky. And from beneath that heaving, furious surface, something stirred, something ancient, something colossal, something waiting. The silence before she rose was a silence that pressed on the bones. A silence thick enough to suffocate. The ocean itself seemed to recoil, to claw backward, as if the waters feared what would come next. Then, like the ripping of the world's first wound, Tiamat awoke. She rose, scale by terrible scale, up through the viscera of the primeval waters, her body a vast cathedral of writhing life. Her eyes burned like molten suns, her breath turned the air to steam. Her form was endless, part serpent, part dragon, crowned with horns that scraped the storm-ridden heavens. Every movement of her colossal body sent tsunamis screaming toward the shattered edges of the earth. She was not a beast. She was not a god. She was a fury given flesh. And she was angry. The winds howled her name. Tiamat. Mother of monsters. Bringer of chaos. Her heartbeat pounded in the marrow of creation itself, throbbing like war drums at the end of all things. She was not merely awake, she was wronged. Betrayed by the very children she had birthed from her own blood and sorrow. Her children had been her pride once, mighty, glistening forms born of the formless void. Creatures with wings sharper than razors, with fangs that could shred mountain spines. She had given them everything. Had nursed their terrible hungers, had whispered the ancient songs of endless power into their dreaming minds. Yet when the cowardly gods grew afraid, when the heavens themselves trembled at the children she bore, they turned against her. Their betrayal was not swift. It was a slow, creeping rot, worming its way through the laughter of her sons and the silent gazes of her daughters. There were meetings held in the cold, dry vaults of the stars. Schemes whispered where the sea could not reach. A plot to strike her down, to silence the endless mother, to carve order out of her beautiful chaos. When the blade finally came, it came in the hand of her own blood. The wound did not kill her. It freed her rage. Tiamat's roar shredded the fabric between worlds. Sky, sea, and underworld bled together under her fury. Her monstrous children, those who remained loyal, gathered to her call. They rose from black trenches and molten vents, creatures made of nightmare and the crushing dreams of dying gods. Dragons crowned in flame, serpents armed with storms, beasts stitched together from despair and fury. She named each one with a curse that echoed forever in the heartbeat of the earth. She would not retreat into the shadows. She would consume the heavens. Her maw opened wide enough to swallow nations. Her tail lashed and continents cracked. From her breath came new monsters, spawned from the vapor of her fury, abominations whose existence was an insult to the trembling order the gods clutched like a fragile, dying thing. The sky blackened under her wings. The seas foamed into madness. The air itself grew thick with screams, the cries of the world's first victims. And yet, even as Tiamat's power reached its terrible zenith, a shadow moved against her. A new betrayal, coiled like a knife behind a lover's smile. Marduk. The god's chosen weapon. A creature of ambition, forged from the terror of those too weak to face their mother. They armed him with storms, crowned him with authority stolen from the bones of his betters. He did not come with love. He came with chains. The ocean trembled again, but not in awe, this time in warning. Tiamat felt him before she saw him, the steady thrum of a force that smelled of war and cold iron. She reared back, her wings blotting out the dying light. The monsters that clustered at her sides hissed and howled, their claws scraping against the very skin of reality. Her heart, once endless and open as the sea, became a blade. She would not beg. She would not fall on her knees. She would meet betrayal with annihilation. The sky cracked open like a rotten shell as Marduk descended, his weapons gleaming with stolen thunder. He raised his net, a net woven from lies, from chains, from promises broken in the marrow of time. And for the first time since the first wave kissed the shore, Tiamat knew a sliver of sorrow, not for herself, but for the fools who thought the mother of monsters would go quietly into death. She screamed, a scream so vast that it tore mountains from their roots, so raw it flayed the air from the lungs of angels. The sea roared with her. The sky bled for her. The earth shuddered, uncertain whether to flee or to fight alongside its maker. She lunged. Marduk lunged. Two titanic forces collided in a violence so pure that it scorched the newborn stars, rippling back through the blood of time. The ocean recoiled, the heavens convulsed, and the monsters of Tiamat's brood hurled themselves into the fray with shrieks that shattered the armor of the sky. In the clash, something more terrible than death was born, a silence so absolute, so final, that the very soul of creation trembled at its edges. And still, the battle raged. The sea held its breath. No waves. No wind. Only a stillness so absolute it strangled the world. Then the surface split apart with a sound like a million bones breaking at once. From the blackness beneath, the Leviathan rose. A crown of writhing scales and twisted spines broke the water first, glistening under a sun that seemed to recoil from what it illuminated. Its body stretched beyond sight, a living fortress of muscle and hatred. The sea steamed where its flesh touched. Its breath was a furnace, its gaze, a blade honed by the fury of gods and the despair of men. The Leviathan did not slither. It did not slink. It moved like inevitability itself, implacable, patient, the crushing knowledge that no prayer would be heard, no mercy would be given. In the ancient scrolls, they tried to describe it. They tried to cage it in words, to shrink it into metaphors of pride, chaos, sin. Fools. Words withered in the presence of such a beast. Language itself felt too fragile, too human, to contain the hunger that dripped from its fangs. It was older than the desert stones, older than the whispers of angels. It was the heartbeat beneath creation, the dark mirror to all things living. When the world was soft and trembling, it was Leviathan that taught it fear. Prophets wept as they saw it in their visions. Warriors blanched and threw down their spears. Kings who ruled with iron and blood felt their crowns melt to ash at the thought of standing against it. Leviathan was not meant to be fought. It was meant to be survived, if the gods permitted it. Its battles were not skirmishes, they were cataclysms. There were stories, old and trembling, of the days Leviathan thrashed in the seas of chaos, clashing with Behemoth, that land-born monstrosity whose roars split valleys and turned rivers to dust. Two nightmares, circling, colliding, carving scars into the very soul of the world. Not for dominance. Not for survival. But because destruction was written into their bones. The waters remember. The shores, still broken and raw, remember. Leviathan does not forget. There were other stories, of a future too terrible to speak aloud, when, at the end of days, Leviathan would rise once more to face a creator who would dare to challenge it. A final struggle where the stars themselves would tumble like stones, where the seas would bleed dry, where existence would tremble on the lip of annihilation. But even prophecy cannot promise victory. Scriptures whispered of spears that would pierce its armored hide, of hooks that would drag it ashore to be served at the feast of the righteous. Hollow dreams, desperate lies. The Leviathan would not fall like a wounded beast at a hunter's feet. It would tear apart the heavens before it surrendered. Every culture that remembered the sea remembered it with different names, different masks, but the terror was always the same. A serpent with 1,000 scales, each one a shield against hope. A mouth filled with fires colder than death. A body so vast that islands could be mistaken for barnacles clinging to its flanks. Its coils could crush mountains. Its breath could smother nations. And still, it waited. It slept in the cold, crushing depths where sunlight never dared to touch, curled like a god dreaming of vengeance. Waiting not for a summons, but for the moment when the arrogance of men would summon it unbidden. When towers would rise too high. When weapons would tear at the sky. When mankind's hubris would reach a frequency that even the Leviathan, wrapped in the silence of eternity, could no longer ignore. The warnings were always there. The dead waters where no fish swam. The ships found torn open like rotten fruit, their crews gone without a sound. The trembling of the earth beneath the shallows, a heartbeat that did not belong to anything human. And the dreams, oh, the dreams! Whispered into the minds of madmen and prophets alike. Dreams of endless coils tightening around the earth. Dreams of teeth like monuments. Dreams of a voice, vast and merciless, speaking a single word that shattered cities in their sleep. Mankind was not made to fight such things. Even the mightiest warriors who ever lived were but sparks against the consuming night that was Leviathan. It was not merely a creature. It was a verdict. A symbol of what waits when order fails and chaos remembers its own name. Theologians penned pages in fevered hands, trying to tame it with allegory. Leviathan as pride. Leviathan as sin. Leviathan as punishment. They built cages of ink and prayer and thought themselves safe. But ink burns. Prayers scatter like dust. And cages, no matter how holy, crack under the weight of what is real. The Leviathan is not concerned with metaphors. It waits with patience that could fossilize suns. It breathes beneath the waves, a pulse of rage older than the oldest lie. And when it rises again, and it will rise, there will be no warning horn, no light breaking through the clouds, no angelic choir to prepare the living for the end. There will only be silence. A silence so vast it will swallow screams before they can be born. A silence so final it will tear the names from graves. A silence that will tremble across every inch of creation, and then, from the horizon, a shadow larger than thought, larger than life, larger than death itself. Still waiting. Still watching. Still hungry. The sea breathes, once. And the shadow moves. The chains cut into her wrists, raw and merciless, as the tide clawed hungrily at her ankles. Andromeda stood against the jagged rocks, trembling, skin slick with cold sweat and seawater, as the world around her fell into a brutal, aching silence. Above, the sun bled into the horizon, a dying fire barely holding back the night. Below, the black waters boiled. Something was coming. The air trembled with a sound too low for human ears, a vibration that rattled the bones and hollowed the soul. Fishermen had abandoned their nets. Merchants had barred their doors. Even the priests had fled from their temples, muttering prayers swallowed by the wind. No one dared to look at the ocean. No one wanted to see the doom they had called forth. But Andromeda had no choice. Condemned not for her sins but for her mother's pride, she was the sacrifice. She was the offering meant to appease the gods and the monster in the sea. Fear bit into her harder than the iron cuffs. Fear, and something worse, the certainty that no one would come. A single wave rose on the horizon. Higher. Higher. Towering into the heavens until it blotted out the bleeding sun. Beneath it, a shape moved, massive, sinuous, wrong. Cetus. The name alone was enough to sour milk, to curdle blood in the veins. The Greeks did not see their monsters as clumsy beasts. They saw them as forces, punishments, echoes of a universe that despised the arrogant and punished the beautiful. Cetus was not sleek like a dolphin or noble like a whale. It was a chaos-given form, a perversion of all the sea could spawn. Its skin glistened like rotted kelp, scales jagged and blackened like burnt bone. Eyes too many, too empty, lined its monstrous face. Its mouth was a thing of impossible width, a gaping ruin from which the stench of old death poured. It moved with a weight that defied the world. Every slow, coiling motion churned the water into froth. Every breath it exhaled sent tremors through the cliffs. Andromeda sobbed soundlessly, throat raw, heart battering itself against her ribs. Her legs buckled, but the chains yanked her upright like a puppet. Her body betrayed her, it trembled not with hope, but with the desperate, primal knowledge that this was the end. Cetus saw her. It did not roar. It did not screech. It simply stared, as if puzzled by the tiny thing fastened to the rocks. As if wondering whether it should bother tasting her at all before the tide swallowed them both. The monster surged forward. The earth seemed to fall away. The heavens seemed to tilt. Nothing mattered except the rush of black water, the claws of hunger in the air, and the certainty that the gods had turned their faces away. Then, a flash in the sky, a streak of brilliance splitting the dusk. A man. No mortal should have looked so small, so fragile, against the rolling mass of Cetus. Yet he descended like a curse whispered into the heart of a tyrant. Hair tangled by the wind, sword flashing like a shard of a star, Perseus hurled himself at the monster with the ferocity of a man who had nothing left to lose. Cetus reared back, the sea boiling around it, a cavernous shriek ripping free from its broken jaws. The sound tore at the cliffs, at the skies themselves, a sound born in a time before men named their fears. Perseus did not flinch. He wielded no ordinary blade. It was curved, wicked, thirsty for blood not yet spilled. He bore no ordinary weapon at his side but the severed head of Medusa, veiled lest its death stare devour even him. He was not here to parley. He was here to kill. Andromeda, caught between horror and awe, watched as man and monster collided in a tempest of fury. The water became a battlefield. Wings of smoke and spray rose with every strike. Cetus lashed out, its tail snapping with the force of 1,000 thunderclaps, sending rocks the size of houses hurtling through the air. One missed Andromeda by inches, slamming into the cliffside with a blast that shook the ground beneath her. Perseus darted and weaved, a fleeting shadow, a blade too quick for the mind to follow. He plunged and slashed, carving ribbons of black blood from Cetus's armored hide. The monster shrieked again, the sound fraying the edges of thought, but Perseus pressed on, relentless, merciless. And then, a flash of madness, he pulled free the head of Medusa. For a breathless heartbeat, the world froze. Even Cetus hesitated. And in that heartbeat, the world shifted. Stone spread like a plague over Cetus's flesh, creeping, cracking, shattering as the monster thrashed in agony. Its wails twisted into silence. Its final movements turned sluggish, heavy, betraying the immense weight of death claiming it. And then, without glory, without fanfare, Cetus collapsed into the sea, a monument to terror, frozen forever in its last breath of hatred. The tide turned red. The chains fell away from Andromeda's wrists, clattering against the stone in a sound sharper than any cry. The sky bled its last light. The sea, for a moment, lay still. And as Perseus stood, panting, sword dripping with the blood of nightmares, Andromeda realized something terrible and beautiful: salvation was never clean. It was never kind. It was carved out of terror and blood and the stubbornness of those who refused to die quietly. The Greeks would sing of monsters. They would carve their images into marble and paint them across their walls. They would tell tales of heroes and gods, of serpents and dragons, of victories wrenched from the jaws of annihilation. But standing there, amidst the ruin, Andromeda knew the truth. Monsters were not vanquished. They were survived. And somewhere, beneath the waves, something else stirred, restless in the cold black. The ocean held its breath. The oars hung motionless over the wine-dark sea, dripping blood and sweat and salt into the abyss below. Odysseus stood at the prow of his battered ship, muscles locked, heart hammering against the prison of his ribs. His men looked to him with hollow eyes, each one knowing what he knew: there was no good choice ahead. To the left, the cliffs rose like broken teeth, jagged and hungry, clutching at the sky. There, hidden in the cracks of stone, a nightmare slithered. 6 heads. Each a snapping maw ringed with razors. Scylla. To the right, the sea shuddered around a yawning throat in the water, a place where the world itself seemed to collapse inward. A monstrous whirlpool, raging and churning, thirsting for ships, for men, for souls. Charybdis. No map could save them now. No prayer could soften what crouched in these waters. Odysseus gritted his teeth until his jaw ached. He could feel it, the pull of Charybdis, a slow and patient hand dragging at the keel. He could hear it, the wet hiss of Scylla's breath sliding from the rocks like a sickness in the wind. There was no straight path. Only a question sharpened to a blade: who would die? And who would suffer to live? A tremor rippled through the ship's hull. From the depths, a gurgling sound rose, like a giant drinking the sea. "Row," he shouted, voice slicing through the terror. The men moved, hands blistered and bleeding, bodies moving as if lashed by invisible whips. The ship lurched forward, a wounded beast limping toward its doom. Closer! The cliffs loomed so near now that Odysseus could count the barnacles crusted on their flanks. Shadows moved there. Something slick. Something watching. A tendril of dread coiled around his spine. Scylla waited. She did not rush. She did not scream. She knew they had no choice but to pass within her reach. The sky above turned black without warning, clouds splitting apart like wounded flesh. The ocean below boiled. Charybdis inhaled. For a heartbeat, it was as if the entire world fell downward. The ship bucked wildly, a toy in a god's careless hand. Men screamed, oars snapped like brittle bones. Odysseus tightened his grip on the rail. His eyes never left the rocks. He saw a flash of teeth. Then another. And another. She struck. There was no warning, no chance to scream. One by one, the heads darted down, faster than thought, snatching men from the deck. Limbs flailed. Mouths opened in silent horror. Blood splattered the planks, hot and vivid against the grey gloom. Odysseus moved without thinking. He hacked with his sword at the empty air, a gesture as useless as cursing the sky. Scylla retreated into the mist, dragging her prizes into the shadow of the cliffs. Their screams were swallowed by the rocks. Swallowed and forgotten. The ship surged forward, carried by sheer terror. Charybdis bellowed behind them, the whirlpool frothing in rage at its mist feast. The men rowed harder, teeth gritted, eyes wild. Blood smeared the decks where their brothers had stood just moments ago. Now, only the hungry ocean remembered them. Odysseus did not speak. Words were ashes in his mouth. There had been no victory. Only survival, and even that tasted bitter. The waters ahead smoothed, trembling with aftershocks of the horror left behind. But no one relaxed. No one breathed easier. Because in their bones, they knew the sea was never truly still. Not here. Not ever. The cliffs faded behind them, but the memory of them remained like a brand scorched into flesh. The memory of snapping jaws and a bottomless throat waiting to pull them into a death without end. The ship creaked, the battered wood whispering against the hunger of the waves. Ahead lay new terrors. New griefs. But behind them, a piece of their souls clung still to those black rocks and swirling depths, lost forever to Scylla and Charybdis. The price demanded. The debt paid in flesh. And the sea did not care. The sea forgot. The sea moved on. But Odysseus would not. Not while the scream still clawed at the corners of his mind. Not while the salt in the air still smelled of blood. Not while the next shadow on the horizon waited, silent, patient, smiling in the darkness. The water lay like black glass beneath the low, broken sky, thick and cold and utterly still. A silence that should never exist at sea smothered the air, pressing against the lungs, stealing breath from the living. Then the surface shifted. Not a wave. Not a ripple. A heave, slow, monstrous, inevitable, as if something vast and ancient stirred in the blind depths, something that had been dreaming for too long and had finally opened its sunless eyes. The sailors froze where they stood, or slipping from numb fingers, prayers dying before they reached trembling lips. Every heartbeat screamed in the hollow of their chests. The sea did not roar. It groaned, a long and awful sound, as though the bones of the world itself were being wrenched apart. And then it rose. First a shadow, spreading outwards in a wide, growing ring of death. Then arms that were not arms but living cables, thick as tree trunks, glistening with brine and horror. They broke the surface with wet, slithering cracks, unfurling toward the sky as if to tear the very heavens from their place. The Kraken. There were no words large enough, no fears fierce enough, no curses black enough to fit what clawed its way upward from the abyss. It towered over the ship like a god forged of nightmare, a tangle of writhing limbs and unseen hungers. The men ran. They screamed. Some hurled themselves into the sea, thinking the dark water a kinder death than what loomed above. But there was no escaping. One tentacle slammed down across the deck, splintering wood like it was kindling, tossing bodies into the air with a lazy, bone-snapping grace. Another coiled around the mast, squeezing, tightening, until the great pole snapped with a sound that was less like breaking wood and more like a soul being torn in two. The stench of salt and old, rotting things filled the air. The Kraken moved with terrible patience, as if it had all the time in the world to unmake this tiny, trembling speck of humanity. It did not rush. It did not rage. It only took, slow, inevitable, absolute. The ship tilted, pitched toward the mouth of the beast. Not a mouth of teeth or flame, but a maw of unending darkness, where the sea and all light were swallowed whole. Above, the sky bled rain. Below, the ocean boiled with terror. Some said the Kraken had always been there, curled beneath the frozen waves of the north, older than the gods, older than the stars. It wasn't anger that drove it to the surface. It wasn't hunger. It was something colder, something vaster. It rose because the world forgot to fear it. And now it came to remind them. One after another, the ship's broken remains were plucked away, men, timber, hope, until the waves closed again over the place where the ship had been. Not a trace left. Not a ripple. Only the endless, silent sea stretching on, uncaring and infinite. The survivors, if there were any, would carry the story back to their villages. They would whisper it by firelight, carving the terror into songs and sagas. They would speak of the Kraken not as a creature, but as a sentence, an inevitability, the slow hand of doom reaching out from under the world. As years turned to centuries, the Kraken would shift in shape. Some would call it a giant squid. Some would cast it as a monster of legend, a creature of fantasy. They would dress it in the colorful silks of stories, wrap it in the bright lights of plays and songs. But none of it would blunt the truth. The real Kraken was no fiction. It was a memory stamped into the marrow of the earth, a scream fossilized beneath the waves. Even now, when men speak its name, some part of them flinches. Some old, ancient part of the soul remembers. The waters grow still. The sky presses lower. The silence thickens. And the Kraken, somewhere beneath the black and breathing sea, turns once more in its endless sleep, waiting for the day it will rise again. Waiting for the day the world will once again remember what it means to be helpless. The wind had fallen away hours ago, leaving the ship stranded on a glassy wasteland of water that stretched in every direction like a bruised and breathless sky. No waves. No birds. Only the sound of the sailor's own heartbeats, loud in the unbearable hush. Then the water moved. Not a breeze. Not a tide. The very ocean sank beneath them, a sudden hollowing as if something vast and unseen was drawing the world inward toward itself. Men dropped their ropes and weapons, staring over the sides with wide, breaking eyes. Below the hull, the sea had turned darker than night. A tremor, slow and pulsing, rose through the timbers, a heartbeat not their own. And then, the shadow. It didn't surge upward like a whale breaching. No. It unfolded, stretching outward, rippling through the water with a terrible and ancient grace. A crown of tentacles broke the surface first, writhing and glistening, slapping the water with sickening, thunderous cracks. Suckers the size of shields flashed pale against the blackness, each one a cold, wet mouth seeking purchase. The Kraken had come. Men screamed without knowing they screamed. Some fell to their knees, praying to gods who had never once listened. Others backed away until they were pressed against the rails, trapped between the monstrous hunger below and the blank, uncaring sky above. One tentacle wrapped itself lazily around the bow, tightening with a creak that made the teeth rattle in their skulls. The wood, centuries old and iron-bound, groaned like a living thing before shattering into splinters. The ship tilted, casting men overboard like dolls. Their cries were cut off as they vanished beneath the oily surface, no struggle, no splash, simply taken. No heroism lived in that moment. Only terror. Only the raw, useless desire to survive when survival had already been stolen. In the old Norse sagas, they had spoken of it in low, grim voices, the creature that waited in the drowning places of the world. They said it was so large that sailors mistook it for an island, dropping anchor in its flesh, lighting fires on its back, only to find themselves dragged screaming beneath the waves when it woke. They had called it Kraken. A word that tasted like blood and salt and old fear. And now, here it was, not a legend, not a myth, but a truth too massive to deny. The sailors had grown up on tales of sea monsters, woven into lullabies and warnings, sung by fathers who had seen strange things beyond the fjords. But the Kraken was different. The Kraken was not a beast you fought. It was the ocean's hand reaching up to take you back. And so it took them, one by one. The ship split apart with a final, wrenching scream. Men were plucked from the wreckage like toys, crushed and swallowed. No matter how they kicked or slashed, no matter how they cursed or begged, it made no difference. There was only the Kraken, endless and eternal. Time passed. The wreckage drifted, quiet and broken, across the endless plain of water. No sign of what had come before. No sign of the lives stolen. Only a few shattered planks and the heavy, dreadful silence that follows slaughter. But the story did not sink with the men. It slipped into the blood of the sea, into the salt of the earth, into the shivering breath of every man who put to ship thereafter. The Kraken became a living memory. A warning stitched into the maps with blank spaces and curling monsters drawn at the edge of the world. Sailors whispered of it in the taverns, their eyes darting to the door as if even saying the name might call it. It slipped from mouth to mouth, becoming larger, wilder, more grotesque, but always true in one terrible, vital way: the Kraken waits. It did not vanish with the old world. It bled into the new. It slipped its coils into the songs of sailors crossing the Atlantic. It lurked behind the fog of whaling ships chasing prophets across barren waters. It stained the ink of poets and storytellers, who gave it 1,000 shapes, 1,000 mouths, 1,000 deaths. And then, somehow, it found its way onto glowing screens and colorful pages. The Kraken, that old terror, was given new faces. It became the monstrous guardian of treasure, the hidden doom lurking in children's cartoons, the titan of battles fought with flashing swords and bright, desperate heroes. But no matter how many ways they dressed it up, no matter how brightly they painted its terrible face, the old fear lived on underneath. Because the true Kraken never belonged to tales or theaters. It belonged to the cold blackness under the waves, to the raw, wet animal terror that wakes in the heart when the boat shudders and the water begins to churn and there is no land, no God, no hope. The true Kraken was not content to be a legend. It was watching. It still is. It waits just beyond the edge of sight, just beneath the skin of the world, where the old fears sleep and dream of drowning. One quiet night, when the stars are gone and the air is so still it feels wrong against your skin, you will know. The water will change. The silence will swell. And far, far below, something older than memory will stir. The earth trembled with a sound like the grinding of bones. Somewhere beneath the soil, the mountains, the oceans themselves, a slow and monstrous stirring had begun, an ancient hunger twisting awake in the dark. There was no warning in the skies. No sudden flash, no roar of the gods. Only a slow pressure, a tightening, as if the air itself were shrinking around the living, squeezing the life from their lungs. And then, from the edge of the world where the coldest seas kissed the broken rocks, the ocean heaved upward, an endless black wall, and from it rose a shadow so vast, so hideous, that men forgot how to scream. Jormungandr. The world serpent. It moved with a terrible grace, coiling around the very bones of the earth, its scales glinting like knives in the dim light. Each movement cracked the horizon. Each breath poisoned the wind. Its body was endless, looping around the globe, knotting reality into itself, tightening like a noose around the throat of existence. In the stillness, you could hear it, the slow rasp of scale against scale, the low, wet drag of its body through the shattered waters. It did not rush. It had no need. Time itself bent around it, and the hearts of men faltered under its weight. Fishermen at the edges of the North Sea dropped their nets and wept, blind to anything but the rising terror in their blood. Their boats rocked and pitched without wind, without wave, drawn into currents that answered not to tide but to something far more ancient and cruel. The children of the fjords had sung of the serpent in old, cracked voices, never quite believing. But the world had not forgotten. The ground remembered. The sea remembered. And now, memory was waking. Jormungandr had been cast into the oceans by the gods themselves, a thing too monstrous, too large, to be contained anywhere else. They had thrown him away like a broken blade, hoping the salt and dark would drown him. Instead, he grew. Grew until the world could no longer pretend he was gone. Grew until he circled the earth, biting his own tail in endless hatred, holding all things tight within his venomous coil. The gods knew. They had always known. There would come a day when the serpent would let go, when he would rise from the deeps and loose his body from its deadly circle. That moment would not be silent. It would be a roar, a shattering cry that tore the heavens in half and split the oceans into boiling graves. Ragnarok. The end of all things. It was not a battle yet. It was not an ending yet. But the air already tasted of it, copper and salt and fire. Dogs howled into the empty sky. Trees leaned away from invisible winds. Mothers clutched their children with the wide, white-knuckled grip of those who see death marching and know they are powerless to stop it. The serpent moved again, a ripple through the world that made the strongest mountains bow and break. In the far-off halls of Asgard, Thor stirred from his restless dreams. His hand found the haft of his hammer, cold and heavy. He knew what it meant. He had always known. There could be no mercy between him and the serpent. Only war. Only death. It was written in the marrow of the world. The sea frothed and steamed around Jormungandr's writhing body, each coil dragging cities beneath the waves, each twist birthing storms that screamed across the sky with the voices of the drowned. He opened his mouth, a cavern large enough to swallow the sun, and from it poured venom, thick and boiling, that ate through stone, through flesh, through the very bones of the earth. Men died without even touching it. Crops withered in fields soaked by it. The oceans festered and blackened under its rage. And still, the serpent called tighter. Not out of hunger. Not out of hate. But out of certainty. The world was ending because it had always been ending, from the first breath to the last. Jormungandr was not the destroyer. He was the fulfillment. The terrible, beautiful, inevitable conclusion to a story that could never have ended any other way. Ships sank into the boiling waters, their sails melting away, their timbers catching fire where the serpent's venom touched. Warriors who had faced armies without blinking now tore at their own faces in terror as the sky bled and the sea burned. Some tried to fight. Arrows were loosed, spears were thrown, prayers were screamed into the choking wind. But there was no fighting Jormungandr. There was only waiting for the world to crack beneath his weight. The serpent tightened his body once more, and the earth groaned, shuddered, screamed. In the distance, a horn blew, a sound so massive, so aching, that it seemed to come from the bones of the world itself. The gods were gathering. The final battle had begun. Jormungandr turned his vast, lidless gaze toward the mountains of Asgard, his breath steaming in the frozen air. His body coiled tighter still, suffocating the world in his lethal embrace. And somewhere, through the roiling storms and poisoned skies, a figure strode toward him. Thor. God of thunder. Breaker of mountains. Slayer of giants. His hammer swung low in his fist, crackling with the pent-up rage of 10,000 storms. His eyes locked on the serpent, and the serpent saw him, and in that instant, the air split apart with a sound like the tearing of the universe itself. They would meet. They would kill each other. It was written. It was done. And still, the serpent smiled. The sea was too still. No wind. No sound. No sway of the boat on the endless water. Just a crushing silence, thick as oil, pressing against the skin like a second, heavier flesh. The men on board knew. Their hands trembled as they gripped their oars, muscles locking, prayers dying half-formed on their cracked lips. Eyes darted to the horizon, but the horizon was gone, swallowed in a suffocating grey mist that choked sight and thought alike. Something was coming. It was not a beast of claw and fang. It was not a storm that could be outrun. It was worse. It was older than any storm, quieter than any death, and it had already set its eyes on them. A ripple disturbed the glassy surface, slow and deliberate, like a finger trailing through wet ash. Then another. And then the sea itself seemed to rise, black and formless, a shape too large, too wrong, to make sense of. A giant head, smooth and glistening, broke through the mist. No face. No mouth. No mercy. Only eyes. Eyes as wide as the sky. Eyes that seemed to pull every memory of safety, of home, of warmth straight from the marrow of the men who dared to look at them. Umibzu. A monk of the sea, the dead whisperers called it. A giant priest, robed in nothingness, sent to punish those foolish enough to believe they could own the waves. The ship groaned under the weight of the silence. No one moved. Breathing was an act of violence against the heavy quiet, and every heartbeat thudded like a drum summoning their end. The sailors had heard the tales. Whispers traded between broken men in taverns heavy with salt and regret. Stories of monstrous monks who rose from the mist, demanding impossible tributes, smashing ships into splinters when denied. No one ever spoke too loud. No one ever dared tell the full story. As if speaking the name might stir the thing from its slumber. Now, there was no mistaking it. The phantom loomed above them, its shape shifting and seething with each breath of the mist, as if the fog itself gave it life. One of the men, Tokishi, the youngest, dropped his oar with a loud clatter. The sound split the air like lightning. Every head snapped toward him, eyes wild with terror. The Umibzu moved. Not fast. Not slow. Inevitable. Its massive hand, dark as a thundercloud and dripping seawater, rose from the grey and hovered above the ship. The deck sagged under a weight that had not yet touched it. The men fell to their knees, some clawing at the planks as if they could sink into them, others whispering broken prayers to gods too far to hear. The creature spoke. No words. No voice. Just a sound, low, resonant, a vibration that shook the ribs and rattled the teeth. A demand. A question. A hunger. The sailors scrambled to throw offerings overboard, rice, sake, coins hastily yanked from their belts. The items sank without a trace, swallowed by the mist-logged sea. The Yu-Mibzu did not move. Its eyeless gaze pinned them like insects. It wanted more. A sudden scream tore the air. Tokishi, wide-eyed and weeping, was dragged to the edge of the boat by unseen hands. He struggled, he pleaded, but the others stayed frozen, paralyzed by a fear that hollowed out their souls. The boy was thrown into the sea. No splash. No ripple. Just silence. And then, movement. The Yu-Mibzu reared higher, its massive form blotting out what little light remained. The ship buckled. Timbers snapped. Men wept openly now, faces buried in trembling hands. It had not been enough. The water surged, not with the force of a wave but with something more alive, more hateful. Black tendrils rose from the mist, thick as tree trunks, and wrapped around the ship, squeezing, cracking the wood like dry bones. Men were plucked from the deck one by one, disappearing into the void, their screams swallowed by the endless, wet hush. The captain, an old man with eyes like storm clouds, stood alone at the bow. His hand gripped the hilt of his sword, but he did not draw it. He knew a blade would mean nothing. He bowed his head. The mist swallowed him. The ship, what was left of it, listed heavily to one side, groaning like a dying animal. Water rushed over the deck, cold and merciless, pulling at the last survivors with fingers made of sorrow and regret. And then, quiet. Not the heavy, choking silence from before. A new silence. A hollow silence. The kind that follows the final scream. Where the ship had been, only drifting splinters remained, bobbing uselessly on the oil-slick water. The Yu-Mibzu was gone. No ripples marked its leaving. No footprints marred the mist. Only the grey, endless sea, stretching blank and lifeless to the edges of the world. The living would tell the tale. They always did. They would speak in shudders and whispers of the black monk who punished pride, who sank ships with a thought, who demanded offerings from the terrified hearts of men. They would tell it because they had to. Because to forget would be to invite the thing back. And somewhere, just beyond the mist, the ocean stirred again. The river shuddered beneath the moon's gaze. Not a ripple stirred the surface. Not a bird dared cry from the mangroves that clawed at the water's edge. Only the heavy breath of the night, humid and thick, pressed against the skin, whispering a warning no one could quite hear but everyone felt. The priest stood alone at the gateway, barefoot on the cracked stone, his robes heavy with river mist. His heart hammered a frantic beat against his ribs. In his hands, an offering, flowers trembling, blood warm against the petals. His eyes stayed low. He dared not raise them. Because he knew. It was awake. Beneath the surface, something ancient moved, a ripple at first, then a tremor so low it thrummed through the bones and filled the hollow spaces in the chest with terror. The river was alive tonight, but it was not kind. It was not gentle. It was waiting. From the black water, a shape emerged. It did not lurch or crash or thrash, it glided, silent and immense. A form that did not belong to the earth, nor to the heavens, but to something older. Something that remembered the first heartbeat of the world and the first scream that tore through the void. Makara. Guardian of the thresholds. Sentinel of all things sacred and all things forbidden. Its body was a contradiction of the fiercest creatures, crocodile jaws wide enough to crush mountains, an elephant's trunk twisting with impossible grace, a peacock's tail that shimmered with colors no man could name. Scales glistened like shards of broken stars, and every move it made bent the air with unseen weight. The priest's knees buckled. The Makara's breath broke across the water like a sigh, heavy with promises older than gods. It circled once, slow and deliberate, tracing the boundary between the sacred and the profane. Those who trespassed would never return. Those who disrespected the thresholds, the unseen lines between life and death, purity and corruption, would be swallowed whole, their names wiped from memory like footprints washed away by an angry tide. The priest knew this. And yet, here he was, standing at the edge, offering the blood and the bloom, begging entry. Begging permission. The Makara watched him with eyes that gleamed cold and bright, not cruel, but indifferent. A guardian with no pity for those who did not honor the ancient pacts. The wind shifted. From the jungle behind him came the low growl of predators, the rustle of unseen things slinking closer. The night itself seemed to tighten around his throat. There was no way back. Only forward. Only through. The priest lifted his offering higher, hand shaking so violently the petals spilled one by one into the water. Each flower touched the surface and was pulled under with a sudden, violent tug, as if invisible mouths devoured them whole. The Makara moved closer. It did not swim like a fish nor crawl like a beast. It flowed, bending the world around it, a tide that obeyed no moon. The scent of iron filled the air. The priest's vision blurred. Tears or sweat, he couldn't tell. His body screamed to run, to fall to the earth and beg for mercy. But his soul knew. Mercy was not part of the old laws. The Makara reared its head high, blotting out the stars. Its mouth opened, not in a roar, not in a bellow, but in silence so perfect it split the world apart. A gateway. Not stone, not wood. Not a place you could point to on any map. A doorway made of breath and prayer and fear. The priest stepped forward. And the Makara watched. One step. Another. The cold river licked at his ankles, his knees, his waist, pulling him toward the opening moor, the shimmering threshold between what was and what could never be undone. The water was no longer water. It burned. It froze. It sang with the voices of things long buried under time. As he moved closer, the world behind him grew smaller, thinner, until it was no more than a brittle whisper in his ears. The jungle, the stars, the aching familiarity of the earth, all crumbling like ash in the wake of a power too vast to hold. The Makara leaned forward, tendrils of mist coiling from its nostrils like the final breath of a dying storm. It did not touch him. It did not have to. The priest fell to his knees in the black river, the offering slipping from his fingers and vanishing into the threshold. He bowed his head low enough that his forehead broke the water's glassy surface. He waited. The Makara's gaze weighed him, stripping him of pretense, pride, even thought. Only the raw soul remained, naked and trembling. A decision made, wordless and absolute. The water surged. Not a wave. A judgment. It lifted him, cradled him, dragged him forward through the mouth of the beast, through the shimmering wound in the fabric of all things. The threshold closed behind him with a soft sigh, leaving only ripples, only silence. The Makara turned, sinking once more beneath the surface, its gleaming form swallowed by the river's black heart. The jungle exhaled. The stars blinked cold and unfamiliar. And on the cracked stone at the water's edge, a single, blood-streaked flower bobbed on the tide, waiting for the next soul brave, or foolish, enough to beg entrance to what lay beyond. The ocean held its breath. Above the endless black water, the moon bled silver into the waves, turning each ripple into a blade. No sound, no bird, no whisper of wind. Only the endless heave of the tide, thick and slow as the pull of death itself. A lone canoe floated in the nothingness, its wooden belly rocking with a heartbeat not its own. In it, a boy sat rigid, hands clutched to the worn edge, his breath trapped somewhere between his lungs and his throat. Salt stung his eyes, but he did not blink. He could not. Something was watching. The villagers had warned him. Never look too long at the horizon when the sea goes silent. Never call out a name after nightfall. Never sail alone under a dying moon. The Old One spoke of things that lived between the skin of the water and the breath of the sky, things that were once like men, but no longer. The Adaro. Born from the restless dead, carved from anger and sorrow, molded by the unforgiving hands of the ocean. Spirits that swam with the grace of fish but bore the cruelty of men forgotten by the gods. The canoe shuddered, a sudden jolt, as if something unseen had struck it from beneath. The boy's hands tightened. He could feel it now, a slow rise of dread, a sour heat in his gut, as if the sea itself had turned against him. He dared a glance over the side. And saw it. A hand, if it could still be called that, emerged from the black. Webbed, glistening, fingers tipped with curved claws that raked across the hull with a sound like teeth grinding bone. A face followed, half human, half something else, eyes too wide, mouth split into a smile too sharp. The Adaro did not roar. It did not screech. It simply grinned. The boy tried to move, to scream, but his body betrayed him, frozen by a terror so old it seemed to sing in his blood. The water bubbled around the canoe, and more shapes rose, tall, thin, bodies rippling with sinew and scale, weapons fashioned from the bones of the drowned. The legends had been wrong. They were not spirits. They were the sea's hunger made flesh. The first Adaro lunged, faster than thought, and the canoe tipped violently. The boy clutched the side with frantic fingers, but another hand seized his ankle, cold and slick, dragging him toward the blackness. He fought, kicking, twisting, gasping, but the Adaro's strength was inhuman, effortless. His foot slipped free, and he scrambled backward, heart pounding against his ribs so violently it felt like it would burst from his chest. The Adaro laughed. A low, wet sound that filled the night air with the stink of salt and rot. The canoe spun, caught in a whirlpool born from nowhere. The sky tilted, the stars smeared into white scars across the heavens. The boy sobbed through gritted teeth, throat raw, mind shattering with the knowledge that there was no saving, no salvation. Only the sea. Only them. One Adaro leapt into the canoe, water sheeting off its body. Its skin shimmered under the moonlight, green, silver, blue, and where it stood, the wood rotted black. Its hand reached forward, not with violence, but with eerie calm. An invitation. The boy shook his head, tears carving cold tracks down his cheeks. His fingers found the fishing spear at his feet. It was old, battered, no match for the nightmare before him. Still, he raised it. Still, he struck. The spear pierced the Adaro's side, and passed through as if the creature were made of mist. The Adaro's smile widened, impossibly wide, as if delighted by the attempt. It leaned closer, breath steaming against the boy's face, reeking of brine and old death. It spoke. Not with words, but with a sound like the rush of 1,000 waves crashing against 1,000 cliffs, an ancient promise, a binding vow. You belong to us. From the corner of his eye, the boy saw the horizon split. A towering wall of black water reared into the sky, taller than mountains, crowned with white foam that hissed like a chorus of serpents. Inside the wave, he saw them, countless Adaro, swimming, leaping, twisting like broken marionettes through the heart of the ocean. The boy screamed. The wave crashed down. Salt and shadow swallowed him whole. Underwater, the world became another place, darker, colder, alive with things that should not exist. Hands pulled at him, dragging him downward, twisting his limbs, stripping him of everything that made him human. His screams became bubbles. His struggles became slow, desperate flails. In the murk, he caught glimpses of the Adaro's world. A city of coral and bone, built from the ruins of forgotten ships and the skulls of sailors. Thrones of driftwood crowned in seaweed. Spears tipped with teeth that had never belonged to anything that walked the earth. Shadows that moved without shape or mercy. He was sinking into it. Becoming part of it. And the Adaro were waiting, arms open, smiles wide, eyes empty of all but the hunger of the endless, eternal sea. Above, the surface seemed a world away, a world that no longer wanted him, no longer remembered him. His last thought was not a prayer. It was a surrender. The sea closed over him with a terrible, aching gentleness. The Adaro sang. And somewhere, far above, the stars blinked out one by one, smothered by the rising tide. The ocean was bleeding sunlight. It pooled across the crests of the waves, slow and sickly, as if even the sun itself was hesitant to touch that place. The The ship floated silent on the waters, every sail limp, every breath of wind smothered into stillness. And the men, they stood like statues, slack-jawed and wide-eyed, their souls half leaving their bodies before a single blade had been drawn. Because they heard it. The song. It wasn't music the way a man plays a lyre or a woman hums to her child. It was older than sound, heavier than sorrow, sharper than hunger. It wrapped around the mind like silk soaked in blood, sweet and suffocating all at once. A sound that wasn't heard with the ears but with the marrow of the bones, the veins in the wrists, the tender meat of the heart. One man dropped his sword into the sea without a sound. Another fell to his knees, weeping like a child abandoned in the dark. A third leaned over the rail, arms trembling, reaching out for something none of them could see. But they felt her. They all felt her. Perched on a jagged rock, rising from the waters like a knife through the chest of the earth. Her form was almost human, but wrong in the way a dream turns into a nightmare without warning. Skin too pale, hair too wild, eyes too deep, like staring into a hole that never ends. In the earliest stories, they said she was winged, taloned, bird-like, a thing of the cliffs and skies. Now, she was something worse. Slippery, scaled, tail coiled around the stone, as if the ocean itself had birthed her in a moment of rage and sorrow. And she sang. Every note a blade. Every word a noose. The captain's hand shook where he gripped the wheel. He tied himself to it earlier, thick ropes knotted around his waist and wrists. He knew. The old warnings clawed at the back of his mind, plug your ears with wax, bind yourself to the mast, do not look, do not listen. But how can a man not listen to the sound that feels like home, like love, like everything he's ever wanted reaching out across the void? The first sailor jumped. No hesitation. No cry. Just a silent step over the railing and into the cold arms of the sea. His body barely made a splash before the water swallowed him whole. The siren smiled. The second man followed. Then a third. One by one, like moths into flame, like prayers into silence. The captain screamed against the ropes, screamed until his throat tore raw, but his voice was a broken, pitiful thing against the song. His vision blurred, his mind fraying at the edges, bleeding memories and reason into the tide. He tasted salt and iron, and for a moment he thought he could feel her hands on his chest, pressing, tearing, pulling. Was he still on the ship? Was he already sinking? Somewhere between waking and drowning, he saw flashes, the bones of men piled at the base of the rocks, picked clean and shining like pale coins. The siren's hands, long and cold, threading through a sailor's hair as she pulled him under, her mouth still shaping the melody that shattered their minds. He realized, then, the cruelest part of it all. It wasn't the hunger that drove her. It was the invitation. The siren offered exactly what the heart craved most. Home. Love. Meaning. She peeled apart the armor of the soul with her song, exposing the rawest, weakest parts of a man, the longing, the loneliness, the endless, aching need to be seen, to be wanted, to be understood. And then she consumed them. Not out of malice. Out of nature. She was temptation made flesh. Doom made beautiful. Another rope snapped. The captain's body jolted forward, jerking against the last threads holding him to the mast. His mind screamed at him to resist, to close his eyes, to pray to gods who had long abandoned these waters. But the song wound tighter around him, a sweet, soft death that tasted of everything he had ever lost. And through the fading light, he saw more of them. Not one siren. Many. Climbing from the waves, scaling the rocks, their mouths open in the same terrible hymn. Some still wore the broken feathers of the old stories, wings ruined and wet against their backs. Others had tails like eels, twisting and gleaming in the dying light. All of them were beautiful. All of them were monstrous. The ship groaned under the weight of the curse. The wood split. The sails tore. The very air seemed to bleed sorrow. The captain closed his eyes. Not to pray. Not to resist. But because it hurt too much to see them and know he could never reach them. that he would never belong to anything so perfectly, so terribly, again. He felt the final rope snap. The siren smiled wider. The water welcomed him with open arms, and the last thing he heard was the song folding around him, not like an enemy, but like a lover. The engine sputtered, then died. Silence crushed the deck like a giant's hand, the kind of silence that doesn't belong in living places. The crew stood frozen, their breath hanging like tiny ghosts in the freezing night air. Far from shore, wrapped in the black folds of the Antarctic Sea, their ship floated dead, a metal coffin adrift in a nightmare. Someone pointed. No one spoke. It moved just beyond the bow, gliding under the skin of the water, massive and white, too large for the mind to hold all at once. At first, the men thought it was ice, a drifting berg, a broken tooth of the Southern Ocean. But ice didn't pulse. It didn't move with slow, aching purpose. Ice didn't breathe. The thing rose higher. Shoulders. Arms. Fingers like drowning tree branches, dragging themselves through the ink-black sea. It had no face, not really, just a blank, pale expanse where a face should have been, as if it had forgotten halfway through being born. And somehow, that made it worse. A creature too old, too tired, too alien to even pretend it understood what a human was. The sailors stumbled backward, tripping over coils of rope, boots slipping on the frozen deck. Their radios hissed and popped with broken static, a mocking echo of their panic. No one could look away. The thing was huge, 30 meters long at least, its arms trailing like pale curtains beneath the surface, its form flickering in and out of the dimness like something half there, half not. The water around it steamed faintly, as if even the ocean hated touching it. The creature hovered, silent, a wordless weight pressing against their minds. One of the younger crewmen, barely out of boyhood, whispered, "Ningen." The word hung in the air, fragile and sharp as glass. Born in the strangled gaps between myth and classified reports, whispered by fishermen and denied by governments, the Ningen was supposed to be a ghost story. Something men made up after too many nights staring into too much nothing. A white shadow at the end of the world. But it wasn't a story now. It was here. And it was watching. The captain's hand shook as he reached for the spotlight. His fingers brushed the switch, and stopped. Some ancient animal part of him screamed to stay still, to not wake whatever ancient thing now slid so close to the ship. The Ningen moved again, slow and dreamlike, circling the vessel. Its body brushed the hull with a low, hollow thud that rattled in their bones. It didn't need eyes to see them. It felt them. Their fear, their smallness, their warm blood thrumming too fast under fragile skin. Somewhere in the ship's belly, a metal pipe burst with a sharp crack. A few men screamed. The Ningen paused, its formless head tilting, as if listening. And then it rose higher. The water peeled away from it like a funeral shroud. Massive hands broke the surface, each finger longer than a man's entire body. One limb reached toward the ship, slow and uncertain, like a blind god fumbling for a prayer it had forgotten how to answer. The vessel groaned under the weight of the moment. Bolts popped. Metal wept. The ocean itself seemed to retreat, pulling back as if to abandon them. And still, no one moved. What could they do? How do you run from something that doesn't belong to the living world? One man, crazy with terror, or maybe something worse, stumbled forward, shouting words no one understood. He flung a flare into the air, a desperate, flickering red scream that slashed through the night. The Ningen flinched. Not much. Just a twitch, a ripple along its massive frame. And then it sank. Slowly. Gracefully. As if it were never there at all. The water closed above it with a soft sigh, leaving only shivering reflections and the aftertaste of something profoundly wrong. But the ocean didn't settle. The air stayed heavy. The radios still spat static. The engines refused to start. The men didn't cheer. They didn't move. They stood on the broken deck, too stunned, too hollowed out, as the cold pressed tighter and the darkness folded them in. Because they knew. This was not survival. This was a warning. The Ningen wasn't the first thing born of these waters. And it wouldn't be the last. Somewhere, below the crushing black, things drifted. Things that remembered when the world was young and silent. Things that listened to the heartbeat of human fear, growing stronger with every frantic pulse. The boy who had first named it sat down hard on the deck, staring blankly at the rippling water. He mouthed the word again, quieter now, almost tender, Ningen. It wasn't just a creature. It was a memory made flesh. A memory of loneliness so vast and terrible it needed a body to carry it. And it had found one. The clouds shifted above. The cold sharpened its teeth. Far beneath the ship, unseen, something brushed against the hull again. This time, it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a knock. The anchor hit the sand with a hollow clank, and the ship sighed against the lazy grip of the water. They had found it, a speck of land adrift in endless sea, a mercy granted by a cruel and silent horizon. Grass grew wild across the rocky shore, twisted trees leaned drunkenly toward the pale sky, and birds cried hollow warnings from unseen perches. It was perfect. It was salvation. It was a lie. Boots splashed through the shallows. Laughter rose sharp and brittle, the kind that masks the kind of fear men dare not name. They built fires on the beach, roasted the last of their salted meat, told themselves they would live to see the golden streets of home again. Night fell heavy, folding the world into the sound of crackling flames and restless waves. The island breathed beneath them. A low, slow pulse, so soft it could be mistaken for the heartbeat of the earth itself. No one noticed. No one wanted to. The stars wheeled overhead, their light too distant, too indifferent. The ship bobbed lazily just off the shore, tethered like a lamb too tired to run. Then the ground shuddered. At first, it was subtle, a sigh through the sand, a whisper in the bones. The sailors sat up slowly, sleep clinging to their skin like cobwebs. The fires flickered, coughing smoke into the night. The ground bucked again, harder now, tilting, groaning. Panic snapped through the camp like a whip. Someone screamed for the ship. Someone else fell, clutching at the earth as it heaved beneath him, the land revealing its lie with a sickening, slow-motion horror. It wasn't an island. It was alive. The sand tore away in clumps, revealing a hide as hard and wet as stone. Gnarled trees slid into the black sea with splashes swallowed too quickly by the vast, eager water. The entire world they had trusted shifted, rising higher, higher, splitting the night into jagged pieces. A single, monstrous eye cracked open near the center of the beast's back. It glowed with a dim, rotting light, a gaze ancient and uncaring, a god's eye too old to hate and too cruel to pity. The Aspidokalone. The name rose in their throats like bile, a word torn from the nightmares of 100 forgotten mariners. The beast moved. Slow. Inevitable. Entire universes of motion wrapped inside the ripple of one colossal limb. The ocean rushed in where the island illusion peeled away, drowning the fires, the tents, the hopes. Men who had never learned to swim sank like stones, mouths open in soundless cries that left trails of silver bubbles behind. The ship. The ship. It spun on its anchor rope, pulled closer to the beast's titanic body as if drawn by the breath of hell itself. The sailors who made it back to the shallows scrambled up the slick hide, slipping, cursing, clawing at moss and barnacle-crusted ridges. Anything to escape the sucking hunger of the sea now boiling beneath them. The Aspidokalone's back split wider, revealing a mouth where none should be, a black maw stitched together by flesh and nightmare. It yawned upward, pulling the air into its lungs in a roar so low it could be felt more than heard. A sound older than language. Older than prayer. The ship was the first to go. Dragged backward, planks splintering under invisible claws. The mast snapped like a twig, and the sails burst into flames for no reason at all, ghost fire, demon fire, laughing at the futility of it all. Then the beast sank. Slowly. Mockingly. The waters roared back in, erasing the fake island inch by monstrous inch. Trees snapped and sank. Rocks tumbled like broken teeth. And the men clung to whatever they could. Some floated on shattered planks. Some screamed until the cold took their voices. Others went under without a sound, claimed by the blackness, swallowed like crumbs by a feast that had been planned since the first map was drawn. In the final moments before the last of the island slipped beneath the hungry surface, a few saw it. The eye. Still open. Still watching. Not out of cruelty, but out of habit. The habit of a creature so vast, so alien, that it couldn't distinguish between storm and ship, between man and meal. For the Aspidoc alone, they had been no different from the mist or the rain. A noise bubbled up from below, something too big, too wrong to ever reach the surface. A last ripple of reality twisting and buckling as the beast slipped into the crushing dark. And then silence. A few broken pieces of wood bobbed on the blood-warmed water. The starlight returned, cold and expressionless. The waves smoothed themselves like a hand brushing away footprints. All traces gone. All except for the stories. The ones whispered across dim tavern tables, marked on the edges of ancient maps with warnings written in red. Here be monsters, they said, and the ink still stank of fear. Not all islands welcomed the lost. Some only waited. Some were only ever waiting. And out there, just beyond the reach of light, something stirred once more beneath the aching weight of the sea. The stillness of the lake was suffocating. Not peaceful. Not calm. No, it was a silence that pressed against the skin, thick and heavy, a warning without words. The surface stretched smooth and black under a smothered sky, the air tasting of iron and moss, thick enough to chew. No bird sang here. No insects whispered. Only the soft, slow sound of water breathing. A boy stood at the edge, barefoot, his toes sinking into the cold, spongy mud. His eyes were wide, straining against the dying light, staring into the endless mouth of the water. He could feel it watching. Not with malice. Not with hunger. Something older. Something deeper. A presence too vast for a heart so small to understand. His father's voice had been clear: never throw a stone into the sacred lake. Never stir its ancient sleep. Never call the Abaya's gaze upon you. The boy's hand trembled. The stone he held was small. Smooth. Perfect for skipping across the black glass. A whisper brushed his ear, too cold to be the wind. The boy flinched but didn't drop the stone. His chest ached with the need to do it, the reckless fire that comes to all creatures who don't yet know how much life can hurt. One toss. One defiant break in the endless stillness. He threw it. The stone kissed the water once. Twice. The third skip never came. The lake swallowed it without a sound. And then the world shifted. The trees on the far side shuddered as if a great breath had drawn them inward. The mud at the boy's feet turned to a sucking, greedy thing, pulling at him, pleading with him to flee. But it was already too late. The water bulged. Not like a wave. Not like anything the sea had taught men to fear. It rose. A slow, deliberate lift, like something ancient shrugging off centuries of sleep. Something vast and unseen beneath the skin of the lake flexed once, only once, and the ripples that followed cracked the silence into sharp, broken pieces. The boy turned to run. The earth betrayed him, slick and treacherous. He fell hard, his breath torn from his lungs. Panic shredded the edges of his vision. His fingers clawed through mud and rotting leaves, desperate for purchase, for anything solid, anything real. The lake exhaled. The stench of old, wet stone and a bitterness too savage for human words filled the air. Then it rose. First, a glint, scales like slabs of tarnished bronze, flashing in the last gasps of daylight. Then a body, coiling, thick as the trunk of an ancient tree, rising higher, higher, until the sky itself seemed too small to contain it. The Abaya. The sacred guardian. Its great, lidless eyes burned with the weight of endless years, seeing not the boy, not the foolishness, but the insult. The wound to the sacred trust between earth and water, between guardian and guest. The boy's scream caught in his throat. A soundless apology. A breath too late. The abaya moved with a grace no creature that size should own, silent, effortless, unstoppable. The water bowed around its girth, wreathing its coils with broken reflections of stars and fireflies too frightened to shine. It could have devoured him in a single motion. It didn't. It didn't need to. The boy would carry this moment until the end of his days, the cold weight of those ancient eyes pressing on his soul, the knowledge that he had been measured, judged, and found wanting. Not in anger. Not in vengeance. In sorrow. A sorrow so vast, so endless, it could drown the world. The abaya's body brushed the surface, sending slow waves to lap at the boy's feet. Each wave carried with it the echo of all who had come before, all who had broken the sacred law, all who had been forgiven and condemned in the same breath. The boy stumbled to his knees, sobs tearing from his chest. The abaya watched. Then, with a movement like a mountain rolling over in sleep, it slid back into the lake. The water closed over it, ripples smoothing, swallowing, erasing the monstrous truth as if it had never been. The lake was still once more. The boy knelt there for a long time, shivering, soaked in mud and terror and something far older than either. The forest around him remained silent. The sky wept in a whisper, a misting rain so fine it was more breath than water. He understood now. Not with his mind, which still trembled on the brink of madness, but with the marrow of his bones. The abaya wasn't a monster. It wasn't a legend. It was the soul of the water itself, the breathing, watching heart of the wild. It guarded not out of hunger but out of devotion, fierce, unfathomable devotion, to the life hidden below the surface, the fragile fish, the stubborn reeds, the tiny, stubborn ecosystems that needed a protector no man could outwit or outfight. And when those things were threatened, the lake would remember. It would always remember. And somewhere, far beneath the black mirror of the water, the abaya coiled itself once again around the dreaming heart of the lake, ancient eyes wide open, waiting. The ship creaked like a dying thing. Masts groaned. Ropes snapped against the cold, rotted wind. The sea stretched outward, endless and black, swallowing the stars one by one, leaving only a hollow sky that seemed to sag under its own weight. The crew huddled at the rail, hearts thundering, breath hissing through clenched teeth. They clutched worn wooden crosses, fingers trembling, prayers leaking from chapped lips in broken whispers. The water before them shifted. It was not the restless slap of waves, not the churn of a storm, but a slow, deliberate parting. As if some hidden hand dragged a finger across the skin of the sea. From that wound in the water, something rose. At first, there was only a suggestion of shape, a heaving bulk draped in writhing weeds, barnacles clinging like old scars, long arms draped in what looked like robes stitched from drowned sailors' sins. Then, a face. God help them, a face. Not beast, not man, but a grotesque collision of the two. Eyes too knowing, too bitter, too filled with the weight of endless suffering. A mouth that sagged open, the corners torn into a permanent grimace of grief, as if every word it had ever tried to speak had been eaten by the void. One sailor screamed, a high, broken sound that snapped against the night. The thing, this sea bishop, lifted its arms. A motion slow, almost reverent. The sleeves of its robes peeled back, revealing twisted fins, pale and bloated, trembling with the effort of moving under the heavy air. It moved its arms in a gesture they had seen before, on land, in stone churches, under painted ceilings. A blessing. A mockery. The bishop of the drowned. The captain staggered forward, knuckles white around his sword, though he did not draw it. What blade could cut what had already been forsaken? What prayer could unmake something the sea itself had blessed? The sea bishop's eyes locked onto him. The ocean sucked at the hull. The ship listed slightly, as if bowing. The thing floated there, suspended between sea and sky, the twisted remains of faith dripping from its every move. It opened its mouth. Sound oozed out, low and wet, a sound not meant for human ears. Not words. Not song. Something older. Something sick with sorrow. A second shadow broke the surface to their right. Thinner. Paler. A creature draped in sackcloth skin, the color of grave wax. A twisted parody of a monk, head bowed, hands clasped before it in obscene prayer. The sea monk. Its body heaved with every labored breath. It smelled of wet coffins and churches left to rot. Its lips moved, but no prayers escaped. Only a soft, gurgling moan, as if the sea itself was trying to remember how to beg for mercy. The men fell to their knees. Not out of piety. Not out of awe. Out of sheer, screaming terror. The captain alone remained standing, though his knees shook, though the sword at his side rattled in its scabbard. The sea bishop's mouth stretched wider. Its voice rose, gathering weight, wrapping around the ship like chains forged from despair. Not a song. Not a sermon. A summons. The sea monk answered. It moved in jerky, desperate motions, swimming closer with shuddering strokes. It circled the ship once, twice, dragging its stinking, spectral body through the water, brushing the wood with a sound like bones scraping stone. The sea bishop's hand lifted again. The men wept openly now, their bodies bowed to the deck, faces pressed to the splintered wood. Some beat their foreheads against the planks, blood mingling with salt water, begging wordlessly to be overlooked, to be forgotten. The captain took a step back. Another. The sea bishop's hand pointed at him. The sea monk slithered closer to the hull, its dead, glassy eyes fixed on the captain's. The water surged upward. Hands, dozens of them, tattered, bloated, clawed, erupted from the black. They grasped at the sides of the ship, nails tearing grooves into the wood, pulling, pulling, pulling. The ship shuddered. The sails flailed against the masts. The stars blinked out, smothered by a cloud of crows that weren't crows at all but something fouler, black-winged things that cried out in the voices of drowned men. The sea bishop's mouth moved again. A new sound filled the air, higher now, a shriek threaded with endless grief, a blade of sound that sliced through flesh and soul alike. The captain fell to his knees at last. The sea bishop lowered its hand. The sea monk reached the side of the ship. It smiled. A thin, wet smile, splitting the wasted face. With a final, obscene prayer, it pushed itself up, dragging its nightmare body onto the deck, leaving trails of slime and rot. The sea bishop sank slowly back into the water, its task complete, its blessing given. The last thing the men saw before madness claimed them was the sea monk kneeling at the prow, head bowed in false humility, hands folded in grotesque devotion. The ship drifted on into the black, a broken cathedral for broken men, bearing a bishop and a monk who had long since been forgotten by heaven but were still very much remembered by the sea. And the sea, it remembers everything. The sea shuddered. For a breathless second, everything froze, the wind, the sails, even the cries of gulls hanging in the sky like broken ornaments. A silence so absolute it smothered the blood in their veins, squeezed the breath from their lungs. Then, with a roar like the gods themselves tearing the sky apart, the world tipped sideways. The ship heaved. Men screamed. The water beneath them wasn't water anymore, it was a mouth. A monstrous, gnashing maw carved into the ocean itself, and it was waking up. Charybdis. The sailors had whispered her name around dying fires, swearing they would never speak it under the open sky, as if the mere syllables might stir her from her hunger. But here, in this cursed stretch of sea, whispers were not enough. She heard them anyway. The ship tilted hard to starboard. Barrels tore free of their lashings. Splinters screamed from the hull. The mast groaned like an animal being pulled apart. Above, the sky spun in dizzying circles, the sun twisting into a bloody smear. The whirlpool opened wider, a gaping throat lined with froth and foam and the shattered remains of all who had come before. The ocean around it sucked backward, dragged by an invisible hand, as if the world itself were being unstitched thread by thread. The captain gripped the wheel until his bones screamed. He shouted, a raw, animal sound, but the sea swallowed his voice whole. The men pulled at the oars. Their muscles tore. Blood streaked the handles. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. The current took them. The ship skidded across the surface, helpless, nothing but a toy in the fist of something ancient and pitiless. The bow twisted. The stern lifted. Someone tumbled overboard, shrieking, hands clawing the empty air. The sea caught him, and then tore him away, down, down, down into the spinning, snarling abyss. The whirlpool center widened, a black wound in the heart of the ocean, and for one terrible moment, they could see into it. Bones. Ships cracked open like broken ribs. Sails strangled into knots. Faces twisted in their final agony, mouths open in eternal screams. Charybdis was not just hunger. She was memory, a memory of every soul she had swallowed, regurgitated into an endless, swirling grave. The ship tilted farther, almost vertical now, and men dangled from the rigging like dying fruit. The water rushed past in wild, whirling walls. The very air seemed to spin, scraping at their skin with invisible claws. The captain's knuckles split open on the wheel. Blood dripped in lazy spirals through the mad air. The whirlpool roared louder, a deafening, grinding sound, like the laughter of some cosmic butcher sharpening its knives. The men screamed prayers to gods that had long since turned their faces away. Still, the current pulled. Still, the mouth gaped wider. The hull cracked, a sickening snap that vibrated through every bone in their bodies. The mast sheared away, tumbling end over end into the waiting throat. The captain's eyes locked on the center of the whirlpool. For the briefest instant, an eye blink in the slaughter of time, he thought he saw her. Not just the hunger, not just the storm. Her. A shape vast and writhing beneath the water. A woman's face, twisted and vast, her mouth a void large enough to drown continents. Her hair a tangle of shipwrecks and corpses, streaming forever through the currents. Her arms reaching, reaching, always reaching. And her eyes. Empty. Bottomless. A hunger not for food, not even for vengeance. A hunger for everything. The ship lurched again. Timbers splintered. Nails ripped free like teeth pulled from a screaming jaw. The men wailed, clinging to anything they could find, ropes, barrels, each other. One by one, the sea peeled them away. One by one, Charybdis took them. The captain held on last. His world narrowed to the feel of the wheel under his torn hands, the sting of salt in his eyes, the howling, screeching, begging roar of the sea dragging him toward oblivion. The ship gave a final shudder, like a living thing surrendering to the axe. The prow tipped forward. The world tipped with it. The captain let go. He fell, not into water, but into mouth. The current swallowed him, spun him, shredded the breath from his lungs. Light vanished. Sound twisted into a low, endless wail. In that final moment, as he was dragged into the churning blackness, he saw her again, Charybdis, mother of endless hungers, bride of the empty places, queen of the things that cannot die because they have forgotten how. Her mouth yawned wider, wider, always wider. And he fell into it. The mist moved first. It rolled across the water like a living thing, coiling and breathing, seeping into every crack of the world until even the stars disappeared. The air turned sour, thick, heavy enough to choke. Oars hung frozen above the black surface, forgotten in trembling hands. No one spoke. No one dared. Then, out there, something moved. Not the way the sea moves, not the way the wind plays with the waves. This was different. This was intentional. The water shivered. A ripple, low and slow, trailing through the mist like a scar. The men leaned forward, their eyes wide and empty. Hearts hammering so hard it hurt. Another ripple. Closer. Then they saw it. A ridge of something vast, something old, rising from the water like the crooked spine of a drowned god. Gleaming. Wet. Black as pitch and yet glistening with a sickly, silver sheen under the wan moonlight. It arched, slowly, sinfully, dragging a wall of spray behind it. The serpent. It did not roar. It did not thrash. It did not need to. Its silence was worse. It slid through the mist like a blade, slicing the world into before and after. A shape too long, too heavy, too wrong for the mind to carry. Its head broke the surface, enormous and terrible, crowned with fins that drooped like the tattered banners of some long-dead empire. eyes like burning coals, set deep in sockets that looked older than the sea itself. It turned. And it saw them. The boat rocked. Men whimpered, clutching their chests as if to keep their hearts from tearing free. Somewhere, a prayer stumbled from dry lips, but it was too late for prayers. The serpent moved again, a ripple in the mist, a whisper against the flesh. It was there in the waters off Gloucester, where fishermen spoke of a beast longer than 5 ships' end to end, its neck coiling high above the sails, its breath steaming the very air. It was there on the glassy skin of Lake Okanagan, where the First Nations had known its name long before strangers brought maps and guns, Agopago, the sacred curse, the water demon who waited with endless patience. It was everywhere and nowhere. It was the scream in the dark when no one else was around to hear it. It was the ripple that brushed the side of the boat when the waters were supposed to be still. The serpent circled. A low groan shuddered through the planks beneath their feet, a sound that spoke of crushing pressure, of weight beyond understanding. The men dared not move. Dared not blink. The mist pressed closer, thick as wool, stinking of rot and ancient mud. A flicker, movement in the corner of the eye, another coil of that monstrous body sliding silently through the waves. The water churned around them, black foam rising in sickening bubbles. And then it came closer. The head loomed up, monstrous and magnificent, rising higher than the mast, jaws gaping wide enough to swallow the moon. Rows of teeth, long and thin as knives, dripped black saliva that hissed when it struck the wood below. The boat groaned again, then cracked. The men screamed. The serpent snapped its head forward, faster than thought, faster than breath. It didn't need to kill them all. It didn't need to feast or rage or explain itself. It simply was. A fact of the world, colder and sharper than any blade man could forge. One man disappeared in an explosion of blood and splinters, yanked into the mist so fast the sea didn't even have time to take him. The others stumbled back, oars forgotten, eyes wild and empty. Still the serpent watched. Still it waited. Some said it was the guardian of sacred places, a keeper of forbidden currents. Some said it was the spawn of gods forgotten by time, crawling back into the world to remind men of their smallness. Others said nothing at all. Because they didn't live long enough to say anything. The serpent called tighter. The boat shuddered again, tilting toward the writhing mass of scale and muscle. Men tumbled to the deck, sliding toward the gaping mouth that waited for them with all the patience of death itself. The mist thickened. Another crack, a beam snapping, a sail ripping free, a scream cut short. One man managed to scramble to his knees, clutching a broken oar like a talisman, as if wood could fight what had always lived under the skin of the world. His eyes were glassy. His mouth moved soundlessly. The serpent watched. Then, with a movement so fast it blurred into nothingness, it struck. The boat split like rotten fruit, the sea rushing in with a roar that swallowed all human sounds. Men vanished under the boiling foam, their cries ripped away by the mist. The serpent lingered a moment longer, coiling around the wreckage, weaving between broken planks and shattered dreams. And then, with a slow, sinuous grace, it slipped beneath the waves. Gone. But not forgotten. Never forgotten. Because even after the mist cleared, after the waters stilled, the world was different. The air tasted of salt and blood and fear. The stars refused to look down. The sea itself seemed to recoil, shuddering against the memory of what had passed through it. And those who dared return to those haunted shores whispered stories late at night, stories of a shape too vast for the mind to hold, of scales that shone like the last hope of a dying man, of eyes that promised not rage, not hate, but something far worse. A patience that would never end. A hunger that could never be filled. A serpent that, even now, even as you sit breathing safe and warm, still waits. The marsh stank of death. It hung in the air, thick and heavy, seeping into the skin, burning the back of the throat. The ground squelched under every step, the mud sucking greedily at boots, as if the earth itself wanted to pull the living down into its black belly. Mist draped over the reeds, clinging low to the water, hiding everything, hiding it. A sound cracked the silence. Wet. Heavy. Like meat slapping against stone. Then another. And another. The breathing started next, slow, guttural, foul enough to rot the soul from the inside out. It wasn't one breath. It was many. Shallow panting, thick snorts, deep rumbling gasps, all led atop one another, too many to belong to one beast. Then the water rippled. Something rose through the mist. First one head, then two, then three, glossy, black-scaled monstrosities, their jaws gaping wide, thick ropes of slime dangling from rotted teeth. Their eyes glowed like dying coals, not with rage but with something worse, hunger sharpened by endless, bottomless hate. And it was still rising. Necks, long and thick as tree trunks, coiled and twisted over each other, writhing with a life that defied reason. More heads surfaced, snapping at the mist, hissing at the unseen stars. 6, 8, 10, no more. The Hydra. It didn't roar. It didn't need to. The terror it radiated sucked the breath from the lungs of any fool who dared stand before it. Each head turned lazily, scanning, searching. It had not eaten in too long. And it was hungry. At the marsh's edge, a man stood alone. A spear clutched in trembling hands. His face was set in a grim snarl, but even he, mighty, brutal Heracles, felt the cold fingers of dread crawl up his spine. Because this was no ordinary monster. This was rebirth weaponized. This was death that laughed at death. He moved. The first head struck. Fast, too fast. It slammed into the mud where Heracles had been standing only a breath ago, sending up a shower of black filth. Before it could recoil, he drove his spear into its throat, the iron tip punching through scale and flesh alike. A gush of dark blood sprayed across the marsh. The head shrieked, a noise so shrill it split the night, and thrashed violently. Then it fell still. Heracles panted, chest heaving. For a heartbeat, he thought he had won. And then he saw it. From the bloody stump of the severed neck, two slick new heads blossomed like poisonous flowers, snapping their jaws hungrily, hungrier than before. The Hydra laughed, a soundless, shuddering ripple that shook the ground beneath his feet. Heracles gritted his teeth. He charged. Spear tip flashing, muscles screaming, he tore into the tangle of necks and fangs and gore. Head snapped and hissed, lunging for his throat, his arms, his legs. Teeth clashed against the haft of his weapon. One jaw clamped onto his shield and wrenched it from his grasp, hurling it into the muck. Another head bit down on his thigh. Pain, raw, electric, blossomed through him. He roared back, bringing his club down with brutal force, smashing bone and scale. The head shattered, but already two more writhed from the ruined stump. He staggered backward, blood pouring down his leg. The Hydra pressed forward. It moved like a nightmare. Heads striking and recoiling, tails lashing through the swamp, spraying filthy water high into the air. Its bulk stirred the very land, making the trees tremble and moan. Heracles knew the truth then. You could not kill what refused to die. He struck again and again, a whirlwind of violence, but for every head he destroyed, two more answered. The marsh grew slick with blood, the monster's, the earth's own lifeblood. It didn't matter. The Hydra was not slowing. It was growing. Breathing heavier now, staggering, Heracles nearly slipped as he planted his feet in the muck. His hands trembled from the force of his own fury. His muscles burned. His mind screamed. But his heart was steel. Fire, he thought. Only fire can end what water feeds. He grabbed a fallen branch, ignited it against a struck flint carried on his belt, and turned back to face the roiling mass of heads. The Hydra hesitated. Not long. Barely a second. But it was enough. Heracles hurled the flaming branch into the severed neck of the newest regrowing head. The flame caught, and the flesh blackened, cracked, and shriveled. The heads did not grow back. He smiled, a smile full of teeth and blood. He moved fast now, too fast for the marsh to hold him, a demon of earth and flame. Slash, burn. Slash, burn. Every stroke of his blade met with fire, every severed head seared shut before the Hydra could replenish itself. The monster screamed then. A sound of pure hatred, pure despair, pure death. It recoiled, thrashing in agony, tearing up whole trees with its death throes. The swamp boiled around it, stinking of charred flesh and rotten dreams. One by one, the heads fell. One by one, the shrieks lessened. Until only the last, the largest, remained. It was different from the others, older, crueler, wiser. Its eyes met Heracles as through the gloom, burning with a hatred that would never, ever die. Its mouth opened, dripping venom that sizzled and hissed as it hit the water. Heracles did not hesitate. He ran forward, driving his blade through the beast's gaping maw, cleaving it into silence. The body shuddered once. Then collapsed, a mountain of gore and shattered scale sinking into the hungry black of the marsh. Heracles staggered back, gasping, the flaming brand slipping from his blood-slick fingers into the mud. The mist swallowed everything. The silence rushed in. And yet, somewhere beneath the earth, somewhere in the rotting veins of the swamp, a faint heartbeat stirred. The Hydra had fallen. But nothing born of water, blood, and death ever stays dead for long. The ocean lay still, too still. No breeze whispered across the water. No gull dared scream. Even the sun seemed muted, a pale and sickly thing drowning behind a veil of thin, yellow fog. The surface of the sea stretched out like a mirror of old bone, unbroken and endless, hiding everything beneath a skin of silence. And then the boat shuddered. Not from wind. Not from wave. Something moved below, a slow, deliberate stirring that made the planks groan and the nails squeal in their sockets. The men froze where they stood, nets in hand, mouths dry, hearts hammering hard enough to snap ribs. A shadow passed under the boat. Longer than anything should have been. Thicker than the tallest mast. It moved with the certainty of an ancient thing, a king in a kingdom older than memory, and it brushed the hull as lightly as a finger across a throat. The fisherman spoke no words. Words were pointless here. The only sound was the ragged breathing of men too scared to pray. Another shudder. A tentacle, slick, rope-thick, lined with suckers big enough to tear a man in half, rose from the water, black and glistening in the sick light. It hovered, trembling, before crashing down onto the deck with the weight of a falling mountain. Screams erupted, raw, tearing things, ripped from lungs without thought or restraint. The boat tipped, wood splintering, water vomiting up over the sides. More tentacles followed. They wrapped around the hull, squeezed, and the ship cried out, a living thing dying under the hands of a godless beast. Men were flung into the sea, pulled under, dragged screaming into the dark that had been waiting for them since the first fish slithered from the primeval mud. Beneath the churning foam, two eyes watched. Vast, unblinking, colder than the vacuum between stars. The giant squid, Architeuthis, had no anger. No malice. It needed nothing but hunger. It was hunger, made flesh, sharpened by 1,000,000 years of patience. And it was not alone in the abyss. Far below, beyond the reach of sunlight, another shape stirred. A jaw wider than a house, lined with teeth like butcher's knives. A body that dwarfed whales. Muscles corded thick as the walls of castles. It moved once, just once, and the pressure of its presence sent ripples all the way to the surface. Megalodon. Not extinct. Not sleeping. Waiting. It had tasted blood in the water. The myths were not lies. They were warnings, barely remembered. The Kraken tearing ships from the sea. Leviathan yawning its endless mouth to swallow sailors whole. These were not monsters of dreams, they were the butchered memories of real nightmares, glimpsed once in the black of 1,000 forgotten nights. Even now, men searching the cold, blind trenches of the oceans find signs that speak louder than screams. Suction scars spiraling around sperm whales, wide as city streets. Bites taken from colossal carcasses with jaw spans that shouldn't exist. Photographs of impossible shapes, glimpses caught in the edges of sonar readings, before the machine breaks and the operator refuses to ever set foot on a ship again. And still we call it myth. Still we tell ourselves we have conquered the seas. Yet sometimes, on nights when the mist folds itself heavy over the waves, when the stars vanish and the ocean turns black as old blood, something ancient rises. It waits just beneath the hulls of trawlers, submarines, cargo ships heavy with their ignorant lights. It circles in the crushing dark, where the only sound is the beating of a heart that doesn't know it is already being hunted. It listens. It hungers. It chooses. Some say they have seen it, eyes the size of full moons blinking once from below, massive silhouettes coiling upward from fathoms untold. But the ones who see it too closely do not tell their stories. They are eaten whole, swallowed into the long, slow digestion of the abyss. The lucky ones are left adrift, their boats shattered, their minds broken, babbling tales of monsters nobody wants to believe. The unlucky ones sink. There is no grave for them. Only the cold mouth of the sea, forever tightening. The myths were born because long ago, men looked into the eyes of the giant squid and saw something they had no words for. They saw eternity. Not the eternity of stars and heaven. The eternity of hunger without thought, of sighs without mercy. Of teeth without end. Somewhere right now, in a trench so black that light dies before it can breathe, something ancient twists its massive bulk and stirs the silt of the ocean floor. It has waited through the fall of empires. Through the extinction of lesser monsters. Through the slow, fragile crawl of man across the surface of the earth. It is still waiting. It does not care for our maps. It does not notice our tiny cities. It will not warn us before it rises. The waves will split, the sky will tremble, and from the hollow belly of the sea will come shapes that are not shaped for mercy or for reason. A glimpse of a vast fin where none should be. A brief, shuddering look into a mouth older than anything born of dust and time. And then the world will remember. It always does. When the blood hits the water, the monsters wake. The boat rocked once, sharp, sudden, though the sea was calm as stone. The boy sat alone at the edge, bare toes brushing the skin of the water. His lantern, small and weak, cast a sickly circle of light that barely touched the blackness yawning before him. Beyond it, the ocean breathed, long, slow exhalations from lungs that had never belonged to anything human. He should not have been afraid. The stars were scattered like salt across the heavens. The air was soft, warm on his skin. There were no storms, no warning calls from the gulls, no distant thrum of engines from nearby boats. And yet his heart clawed against his ribs. His breath tasted of copper. His fingers curled hard into the wood beneath him, as if the planks might pull free and leave him floating, weightless, helpless, naked over a hunger too wide to ever be filled. Something brushed his foot. He didn't move. Movement would be worse. Movement would attract its attention. Because somewhere in the gut of the world, past the frail floorboards of sense and science, the ancient rules still breathed, rules older than light, older than names, older than fear itself. Do not look into the dark. Do not tempt the dark. Do not think yourself safe above it. The ocean is not a place. It is a mind. It watches. It remembers. It waits. In the marrow of his bones, the boy knew what every man had known before him, what the first sailors screamed into the night, what fishermen whispered in broken prayers, what the dreamers and madmen glimpsed in their half-lit terrors. Beneath the thin skin of the sea lies a mouth. A mouth too vast to ever see whole. A mouth that speaks in silence and pulls at the soul with cold, wet fingers. It is not the sharks, the whales, the squids we fear. It is what might be bigger. It is what might be thinking. It is what might have no thoughts at all, only hunger as pure as the scream trap behind our teeth. The mind plays tricks in the blackness. It sees shapes where there are none. It hears breathing in the slow lap of water against the hull. It spins monsters from the mist and carves gods from the absence of stars. We create the Leviathan because the idea of an empty sea is worse. Better to think there is something there, something massive and terrible, than to accept that the void is indifferent. We would rather face fangs than silence. We would rather fight a monster than float forgotten in nothingness. The boy shifted his weight slightly. The boat groaned. The lantern flickered, stretching his shadow long and broken across the deck. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw something move beneath the surface, an outline, coiling, thicker than any tree trunk, gliding just out of reach. He squeezed his eyes shut. Memory throbbed behind his lids, old stories of the Kraken, of Umibzu, of the great water dragons that could drag entire fleets into the lightless womb of the ocean. We carry these shapes inside us, etched into the chalk of our bones. They grow in the cracks of our fear, feeding on every unknown ripple, every lost ship, every echo of a scream that no one lived to explain. The collective unconscious drags them up from the trenches. It gives them names, faces, hunger. It fills the black with writhing bodies and gleaming eyes because something in us knows the sea is not ours. It was never ours. It tolerates us the way a crocodile tolerates a bird cleaning its teeth, only as long as it amuses. The monsters we create are not mistakes. They are warnings. Every culture, every land touched by the tides, has their own. A Gopago slipping through the lakes of Canada, long and sinuous, whispering promises of easy death. The Gloucester sea serpent, towering and ridged, glimpsed just long enough to carve terror into men's hearts like initials into bark. The beasts are different but the fear is the same, an ancient pulse, passed from father to son, mother to daughter, generation to generation, carved not into language but into instinct. The boy opened his eyes. The water was still. The lantern's light had died without him noticing. And in the reflectionless surface where light should have lived, a pair of eyes stared back. No, not eyes. Holes. Wounds in the world, deeper than the trenches, wider than the skies. They were not cruel. They were not kind. They were the perfect, thoughtless hunger of the beginning and the end, stitched together by every nightmare man had ever bled into the night. He couldn't move. The boy's mind screamed, run, scream, fight, but his body was frozen, chained by an older command whispered from the cells of the first fish that dared breathe air. Submit. Accept. Fall. The water moved. Not a splash. Not a ripple. It tilted, shifted, as if something immense beneath it merely exhaled, and the whole world shivered at the thought. A long shape stirred beneath him. Longer than the boat. Longer than the memories of safety. Longer than the boy's own small name. The darkness blinked, and for a split second the boy saw what men had tried to forget, a mouth wide enough to swallow cities, lined with teeth ground smooth by time, patient as tombstones, eager as wolves. He wanted to scream. But the ocean swallowed the sound before it left his throat. There are reasons we imagine monsters beneath the waves. It is not childish. It is not superstition. It is the truest thing we know. It is the oldest knowledge whispered into our blood, the knowledge that beneath every bright surface, every calm facade, every whispered lullaby, something is watching. Something that remembers the first screams. Something that will be there to hear the last. And when the boy slid, silent as ash, from the edge of the boat into the black below, he did not thrash. He did not cry. He let the water take him. Because some fears are too old to fight. Some fears are not meant to be beaten. Some fears are home. The lighthouse blinked once, twice, and then it went blind. For a moment, the world lost its tether. No sound. No light. Only the gaping blackness where the ocean and sky tore into each other like broken gods. The air hung heavy, so thick it crawled down the throat and filled the lungs with something colder than fear. A gull cried somewhere above the unseen cliffs, but even its voice cracked into nothing before it reached the water. He stood at the cliff's ragged edge, boots kissing crumbling stone, eyes staring into a darkness that stared back harder. Salt stung his face. Wind tore at his coat. And beneath it all, the slow, awful truth, the sea was changing again. Not with kindness. Not with care. With the slow, endless grind of something too big to reason with, too ancient to pity the fragile maps of men. For centuries, they had tried to name it. Tried to fence it in with ink and paper. Leviathan. Charybdis. Merrow. Kraken. Gods. Demons. beasts with scales that shone brighter than the sun, and tentacles that could smash fleets like driftwood. Men gave it faces because faceless things were worse. They wrote myths because silence screamed louder. And even now, even with sonar pulses and robot eyes crawling through the black canyons of the seabed, even with satellites snapping photos of the blue endlessness from the stars, it remains, that ache behind the ribs when staring too long into the endless churn of water. It remains, whispering. Changing shape, changing story, but never, ever going away. He knelt, pressing a trembling hand against the stone. The earth pulsed, slow and steady, like the heartbeat of something not yet dead. He thought of ancient sailors sewing pearls into their skin to bribe the gods of the storm. He thought of mothers crying salt tears into the surf, offering songs and blood for safe passage. They knew. Before microscopes and engines and steel hulls, they knew. The sea was not a place you crossed. It was a thing you survived, if it allowed. It swallowed cities whole and spat their bones into new myths. Atlantis. Vineta. YS. Names lost to foam and forgotten prayers. It sculpted monsters from memory, from grief, from the endless ache of wanting to explain the unexplainable. He could almost hear them if he closed his eyes, the old ones, chanting under a blood-red moon, weaving stories to make sense of a world that never loved them back. The deep is always hungry, they whispered. It does not hate you. It simply does not know you exist. The mist pressed in, thick and heavy, curling into the open spaces of his mind. In it, shapes moved, slick, ancient things without mercy or name. Memories not his own bloomed behind his eyelids, a Viking ship split in two by an unseen beast, an African fisherman whispering to the restless spirits below the water, a Polynesian navigator feeling the pull of invisible tides on his bare skin. The myths changed. The sea remained. And now, in an age of wires and steel and glass towers, we write new monsters. We frame them in science, in theory, in numbers, but they are the same shapes, the same hollow-eyed terrors crawling out of the wet blackness to remind us how small we are. Giant squid still writhe in trenches too far for light to touch. Toothless mouths the size of houses still yawn open in the dark. Entire mountains of living creatures bloom and die under pressures that would crush a man to mist. We call them discoveries, but they are only the newest names stitched onto the old fear. The deep does not change. Only the story does. And even that, only barely. He lifted his head and stared hard into the suffocating night. Somewhere beyond the cliffs, something massive turned in the water. He couldn't see it, but he could feel the ripple, the tiny shudder that rattled the marrow of the land itself. The sea is a mirror. It shows us ourselves. Not the pretty parts, not the faces we craft for polite company, but the raw, naked terror stitched into every cell, the knowledge that there will always be something bigger, something older, something hungrier, waiting just beyond what we dare to look at. Beneath the myths, beneath the science, beneath the trembling need to understand, that truth remains. It was never about monsters. It was never about gods. It was about the helpless, endless truth that we are not in control. Not over the waves. Not under the stars. Not over the shifting crust of the earth. And the ocean, patient, merciless, ageless, reminds us every day, every hour, every breath. The myths are not lies. They are scars. Carved by the hands of the terrified, the lost, the wonder-struck. Each one a fragile attempt to name the thing that could never be named. Each one a tiny, flickering light against a horizon that will never be tamed. The mist thickened into ropes, dragging across his skin. A cold, wet mouth opened somewhere below the cliffs, exhaling a low moan that rattled the bones of the earth. He thought he saw something then, a towering shadow shifting against the clouds, vast and coiling, ancient beyond imagining. Or maybe it was only the wind. Or maybe it was the sea remembering itself. The lighthouse blinked once, twice, and then stayed dark. He didn't move. There was nothing left to do. Only listen. Only wait. Because some things are too large for words. Some things outlive gods. And somewhere in that endless black, the myths grow new teeth.